Our topic is about an act providing the establishment and management of National Integrated Protected Area System of 1982. Our objectives are: first, know the brief introduction of the law and those who approved it. Second, understand the reason of declaration of the policy and areas protected. Third, recognize the important definition stated. And the last is determine the establishment and extent of the system under this law. Republic Act Number 7586 is an act providing for the establishment and management of National Integrated Protected Area System. It is also an act which is consolidation of House Bill number 34696 and Senate Bill number 1914 was finally passed by the House of Representatives and Senate on February 6, 1992 and approved on June 2, 1992. This Republic Act is implemented to maintain essential ecological processes and life support system, also to preserve genetic diversity, to ensure sustainable use of resources found therein, and lastly, to maintain their natural conditions to the greatest extent possible. Who approved the law? These are the people who approved the law. First, Ramon V. Mitra. He is the Speaker of the House of Representatives. Second, Niptali A. Gonzalez. He is the President of the Senate. Third, Anacleto D. Baduy Jr. He is the Secretary of the Senate. Fourth, Camilo L. Sabio. He approved by the House of the Representatives. The last is Corazon C. Aquino. She approved by the late President of the Philippines. Section 1 title: Known and referred to as the National Integrated Protected Area System Act of 1992. Section 2 Declaration of Policy: To secure for the Filipino people of present and future generations the perpetual existence of all native plants and animals. Declaration of Policy possesses common ecological values that may be incorporated into a holistic plan representative of our natural heritage. That effective administration of this area is possible only through cooperation among national government, local government, and concerned private organizations. That the use and enjoyment of these protected areas must be consistent with the principle of biological diversity and sustainable development. Section 3 Categories. These are the following areas that are protected: strict nature reserve, natural park, natural monument, wildlife sanctuary, protected landscapes and seascapes, resource reserve, natural biotic areas, and other categories established by law.
Section 4 Definition of Terms: National Integrated Protected Area System, or NIPAS. It is to maintain and support, to preserve and ensure administration of all designated protected areas. This is to ensure sustainable use of resources found therein and to maintain their natural conditions. B. Protected areas. It is to identify portions of land and water. The reason of their unique physical and biological significance is to manage to enhance biological diversity and protect it against destructive human exploitation. C. Buffer zones. It is to identify areas outside the boundaries of an immediate adjacent. It is to designate protected areas pursuant to Section 8 that need special development control in order to avoid or minimize harm to the protected area. D. Indigenous cultural community. It is a group of people sharing common bonds of language, customs, tradition, and other distinctive cultural traits, and who have since time immemorial occupied, possessed, and utilized a territory. E. National Park. It is an area or preserved scenery of natural and historic objects, animals, and plants. Take for an example, Biak na Batu. The part has crystal clear river, waterfall, caves with meaningful history. Another is Karamuan Peninsula National Park and many more. And national park provide enjoyment of these features in many areas. F. Natural monuments are preserved nationally significant, a relatively small area focused on protection of small features to protect natural features on account of their special interest or unique characteristics. An example of that is Biak na Batu. The park has crystal clear river, waterfall, caves with meaningful history, and Karamuan Peninsula National Park. G. Natural biotic area. An area set aside to allow the way of life of societies living in harmony with the environment to adapt to modern technology at their pace. The example of that is Mount Apo, Mount Isanog, Chocolate Hills, and Mayon Volcano. H. Natural Park. A large area maintained and to protect outstanding natural and scenic areas. A relatively large area not materially altered by human activity where extractive resource use are not allowed. I. Protected landscapes and seascapes. An area featuring species of flora and fauna of national ecosystem. It is an area of national significance which are characterized by the harmonious interaction of man and land while providing opportunities for public enjoyment through the recreation and tourism within the normal lifestyle and economic activity of these areas. The example of that is Angat River in Bulacan and Casignan River. J. Resource Reserve. It is to conserve the area, preserve the scenery, the natural and historic objects, wild animals, and plants. It is an extensive and relatively isolated and inhabited area normally with difficult access designated as such to protect natural resources of the area for future use and prevent or contain development activities that could affect the resource pending the establishment of objects which are based upon appropriate knowledge and planning. An example of that is Lamau Forest in Bataan, Turtle Island Wildlife Sanctuary in Tawi-Tawi, Kari- Caliraya Falls in Laguna, and Siargao Island.
Section 5. Establishment and extent of the system. The establishment and operationalization of the system shall involve the following. First, all areas or islands in the Philippines proclaimed hereby designated as initial components of the system. This means that all areas or islands in the Philippines proclaimed, designated, or set aside, pursuant to a law, presidential decree, presidential proclamation, or executive order as national park, game refuge, bird and wildlife sanctuary, wilderness area, strict nature reserve, watershed, mangrove reserve, fish sanctuary, natural and historical landmark, protected and managed landscape seascape, as well as identified virgin forest before the effectivity of this act are hereby designated as initial components of the system. The initial components of the system shall be governed by existing laws, rules, and regulation. Next, 1 year after the effectivity of the Act, DENR shall submit map and legal descriptions or natural boundaries of each protected area initially comprising the system. Next, all DENR records must submit to Congress and shall be made available to the public. This means that all DNR records pertaining to said protected areas, including maps and legal description or natural boundaries, copies of rules and regulation governing them, copies of public notice, and reports submitted to Congress regarding pending additions, eliminations, and modifications shall be made available to the public. Within 3 years from the effectivity of this act, the DENR shall study and review each area tentatively composing the system. The study must include the following. First, a forest occupant survey an ethnographic study, a protected area resource profile, land use plans and done in coordination, and other background studies as well as sufficient base for selection. Another, notify the public of proposed action through publication in a newspaper of general circulation. And lastly, presidential issue a presidential proclamation designating the recommended areas.
Section 6. Additional areas to integrated to the system. Notwithstanding the establishment of the initial component of the additional areas with outstanding physical features, anthropological significance, and biological diversity in accordance with the provisions of Section 5D. Section 7. The establishment as protected area. When in the opinion of the DENR, a certain protected area should be withdrawn or disestablished or its boundaries modified as warranted by a study and sanctioned by the majority of the members of the respective boards for the protected area as herein established in Section 11, it shall in turn advise Congress. This establishment of protected area under the system on or modification of its boundary shall take effect pursuant to an act of Congress. Thereafter, said area shall revert to the category of public forest unless otherwise classified by Congress, provided, however, that after the establishment by Congress, the Secretary may recommend the transfer of such disestablished area to other government agencies to serve other priority programs of national interest. Section 8. Buffer Zones. For each protected area, there shall be established peripheral buffer zones when necessary. In the same manner as Congress established the protected area to protect the same from activities that will directly and indirectly harm it. Such buffer zones shall be included in the individual protected area management plan that shall be prepared for each protected area. The DENR shall exercise its authority over protected areas as provided in this act on such area and designated as buffer zones. Section 10. Administration and Management of the System. The National Integrated Protected Area System is hereby placed under the control and administration of the Department of Environment and Natural Resources. For this purpose, there is hereby created a division in the regional offices of the department to be called the Protected Areas and Wildlife Division in regions where protected areas have been established, which shall be under the supervision of a regional technical director and shall include subordinate officers, clerks, and employees as may be proposed by the Secretary, duly approved by the Department of Budget and Management, and appropriate by the Congress. The service thus established shall manage protected areas and promote the permanent preservation to the greatest extent possible of their natural conditions. To carry out the mandate of this act, the Secretary of the DENR is empowered to perform any and all of the following acts. A. To conduct studies on various characteristic features and conditions of the different protected areas using commonalities in their characteristics, classify and define them into categories, and prescribe permissible or prohibited human activities in each category in the system. B. To adopt and enforce a land use scheme and zoning plan in adjoining areas for the preservation and control of activities that may threaten an ecological balance in the protected areas. C. To cause the preparation of and exercise the power to review all plans and proposals for the management of protected areas. D. To, to promulgate rules and regulations necessary to carry out the provisions of this act. E. To deputize field officers and delegate any of his powers under this act and other laws to expedite its implementation and enforcement. F. To fix and prescribe reasonable NIPAS fees to be collected from government agencies or any person, firm, or corporation deriving benefits from the protected areas. G. To exact administrative fees and fines as authorized in Section 21 for violation of guidelines, rules, and regulations of this Act, as would endanger the viability of protected areas. H. To enter into contracts and or agreements with private entities or public agencies as may be necessary to carry out the purpose of this act. I. To accept in the name of the Philippine government and in behalf of Nipas funds, gifts or bequests of money for immediate disbursements or other property in the interest of the Nipas, its activities or its services. J. To call on any agency or instrumentality of the government as well as academic institutions, non-government organizations, and the private sector as may be necessary to accomplish the objectives and activities of the system. K. To submit an annual report to the President of the Philippines and to Congress on the status of protected areas in the country. To establish a uniform marker of the system, including an appropriate and distinctive symbol for each category in the system, in consultation with appropriate government agencies and public and private organizations. To determine the specification of the class, type and style of buildings and other structures to be constructed in protected areas and and materials to be used. Control the construction, operation, and maintenance of roads, trails, waterworks, sewerage, fire protection, and sanitation systems and other public utilities within the protected area. Control occupancy of suitable portions of the protected area and resettle outside of said area forest occupants therein, with the exception of the members of indigenous communities area, and lastly, to perform such other functions as may be directed by the President of the Philippines and to do such acts as may be necessary or incidental to the accomplish of the purpose and objectives of the system. Section 11. Protected Area Management Board. A protected area management board for each of the established protected area shall be created and shall be composed of the following: the regional executive director under whose jurisdiction the protected area is located, one representative from the autonomous regional government if applicable, the provincial development officer, one representative from the municipal government, one representative from each barangay covering the protected area, one representative from each tribal community if applicable, and at least 3 representatives from non-government organizations or local community organizations, and if necessary, 1 representative from other departments or national government agencies involved in protected area management. The board shall, by a majority vote, decide the allocations for budget, approve proposal for funding, decide matters relating to planning, peripheral protection, and general administration of the area in accordance with the general management strategy. The members of the board shall serve for a term of 5 years without compensation, except for actual and necessary traveling and subsistence expenses incurred in the performance of their duties. They shall be appointed by the Secretary of the DENR as follows. A. A member who shall be appointed to represent each local government down to barangay level whose territory or portion is included in the protected area. Each appointee shall be the person designated by the head of such LGU, except for the provincial development officer who shall serve ex officio. B. A member from non-government organizations who shall be endorsed by heads of organizations which are preferably based on in the area which have established and recognized interest in protected areas. C. The red in the region where such protected area lies shall sit as ex officio member of the board and shall serve as the advisor in matters related to the technical aspects of management of the area. And lastly, D. The red shall act as chairman of the board. When there are two or more reds in the board, the secretary shall designate one of them to be the chairman. Vacancies shall be filled in the same manner as the original appointment. Section 12. Environmental Impact Assessment. Proposals for activities which are outside the scope of the management plan for protected areas shall be subject to an environmental impact assessment as required by law before they are adopted, and the results thereof shall be taken into consideration in the decision-making process. No actual implementation of such activities shall be allowed without the required Environmental Compliance Certificate or ECC under the Philippine Environmental Impact Assessment or EIA system. In instances where such activities are allowed to be undertaken, the proponent shall plan and carry them out in such manner as will minimize any adverse effects and take preventive and remedial action when appropriate. The proponent shall be liable for any damage due to lack of caution or indiscretion. Section 13. Ancestral lands and rights over them. Ancestral lands and customary rights and interests arising shall be accorded due recognition. The DENR shall prescribe rules and regulations to govern ancestral lands within protected areas, provided that the DENR shall have so power to evict indigenous communities from their present occupancy, nor resettle them to another area without their consent, provided, however, that all rules and regulations, whether adversely affecting said communities or not, shall be subjected to notice and hearing to be participated in by members of concerned indigenous community. Section 13. Survey for Energy Resources. Consistent with the policies declared in Section 2 hereof, protected areas except strict nature reserves and natural parks may be subjected to exploration only for the purpose of gathering information on energy resources, and only if such activity is carried out with the least damage to surrounding areas. Survey shall be conducted only in accordance with a program approved by the DENR, and the result of such surveys shall be made available to the public and submitted to the President for recommendation to Congress. Any exploitation and utilization of energy resources found with NIPAS areas shall be allowed only through a law passed by Congress. Section 15. Areas under the management of other departments and governments instrumentalist. Should there be protected areas or portions thereof under the jurisdiction of government instrumentalities other than the DENR, such jurisdiction shall, prior to the passage of this act, remain in the said department or government instrumentality, provided that the Department of Government Instrumentality exercising administrative jurisdiction over said protected area or a portion thereof shall coordinate with the DENR in the preparation of its management plans upon the effectivity of this act. Section 16. Integrated Protected Areas Fund. There is hereby established a trust fund to be known as Integrated Protected Areas or IPAS. Funds for purposes of financing projects of the system. The IPAS may solicit and receive donations, endowments, and grants in the form of contributions, and such endowments shall be exempted from income or gift taxes and all other taxes, charge, or fees imposed by the government or any political subdivision or instrumentality thereof. All incomes generated from the operation of the system or management of wild flora and fauna shall accrue to the fund and may be utilized directly by the DENR for the above purpose. These incomes shall be derived from a. Taxes from the permitted sale and export of flora and fauna and other resources from protected areas. B. Proceeds from lease of multiple use areas. C. Contributions from industries and facilities directly benefiting from the protected area. D. Such other fees and income derived from the operation of the protected area. Disbursements from the funds shall be made solely for the protection, maintenance, administration, and management of the system, and duly approved projects endorsed by the PAMBs in the amounts authorized by the DENR. Section 17. Annual Report to Congress. At the opening of each session of Congress, the DENR shall report to the President for a transmission to Congress on the status of the system, regulation in force, and other pertinent information together with recommendations. Section 18. Field Officers. All officials, technical personnel, and forest guards employed in the Integrated Protected Area Service or all persons deputized by the DENR upon recommendation of the Management Board shall be considered as field officers and shall have the authority to investigate and search premises and buildings and make arrests in accordance with the rules on criminal procedure for the violation of laws, regulations relating to the protected areas. Persons arrested shall be brought to the nearest police precinct for investigation. Nothing herein mentioned shall be construed as preventing regular law enforcers and police officers from arresting any person in the act of violating said laws and regulations. Section 19. Special Prosecutors. The Department of Justice shall designate special prosecutors to prosecute violations of the laws, rules, and regulations in protected areas. Section 20. Prohibited Acts. Except as may be allowed by the nature of their categories and pursuant to rules and regulations governing the same, these following acts are prohibited within protected areas. A. Hunting, destroying, disturbing, or mere possession of any plants or animals or products derived therefrom without a permit from the Management Board. B. Dumping of any waste products detrimental to the protected area or to the plants and animals or inhabitants therein. C. Use of any motorized equipment without a permit from the Management Board. D. Mutilating, defacing, or destroying objects of natural beauty or objects of interest to cultural communities of scenic value. E. Damaging and leaving roads and trails in a damaged condition. F. Squatting, mineral locating, or otherwise occupying any land. G. Constructing or maintaining any kind of structure, fence, or enclosures, conducting any business enterprise without a permit. H. Living in exposed or unsanitary conditions, refuse or debris, or depositing in ground or in bodies of waters. And lastly, I. Altering, removing, destroying, or defacing boundary marks or signs. Section 21. Penalties. So, whoever violates this act or any rules and regulations issued by the department pursuant to this act, or whoever is found guilty by a competent court of justice or any of the offenses in the preceding section shall be fined in the amount of not less than 5,000 pesos nor more than 500,000 pesos, exclusive of the value of the thing damaged, or imprisonment for not less than 1 year but not more than 6 years, or both, as determined by the court, provided that if the area requires rehabilitation or restoration, as determined by the court, the offender shall be required to restore or compensate for the restoration to damages, provided further that court shall order the eviction of the offender from the land and the forfeiture in favor of the government of all minerals, timber, or any species collected or removed, including all equipment, devices, and firearms used in connection therewith, and any construction or improvement made thereon by the offender. If the offender is an association or corporation, the president or manager shall be directly responsible for the act of his employees and laborers, provided, finally, that the DENR may impose administrative fines and penalties consistent with this act. Section 22. Separability Clause. If any part or section of this act is declared unconstitutional, such declaration shall not affect to other parts or sections of this act. Section 23. Repealing Clause. All laws, presidential decrees, executive orders, rules, and regulations inconsistent with any provisions of this act shall be deemed repealed or modified accordingly. And lastly, Section 24. Effectivity Clause. Act shall take effect 15 days after its complete publication in 2 newspapers of general circulation. That would be all. Thank you and God bless.